This video is brought to you by Surfshark VPN. What's up, guys? Michael here to talk about the patron saint of blowing stuff up. Michael Bay occupies a weird space within cinema. His movies typically rake in the bucks at the box office, yet critical discussion of his work tends to question Bay's directorial merit. You could argue that his films are somewhat meaningless and vapid, and plenty of people do. But his sizable audience keeps coming back for that Bayified explosion happy glory. So what's going on here? How did we end up in a world with 5 Transformers movies? Is Michael Bay just a glorified popcorn salesman, or are there deeper things at play in his work? Strap in, people. We're going deeper dumb on Michael Bay. But before we dive in, I want to talk about this video sponsor, Surfshark VPN. Surfshark VPN keeps your data safe as you navigate the internet thanks to secure protocols and uncrackable encryption. Among the many advantages of using a secure VPN like Surfshark is that the internet can't figure out where in the world I'm located. So that means I can shop for plane tickets without getting price gouged, all by connecting to VPNs in different countries until I track down the best deal. It's also super handy for watching movies and TV shows that have been released in other countries. All you need is one subscription to cover all of your favorite devices, like your laptop, PlayStation, Xbox, Amazon Fire Stick, and beyond, and on your go-to apps like Firefox and Chrome, which also have options for a VPN. Click the link in the description and use the promo code Wisecrack to get 83% off plus 3 extra months for free. Go to surfshark.deals/Wisecrack or hit the link in the description. Protect yourself online and download Surfshark VPN today. And now, back to the show. Now, opinions on Michael Bay are a dime a dozen. On one side, you've got the haters, often critics like Mark Kermode, who reviewed Transformers 4 in the form of a YouTube video in which he bangs his head against a wall. Don't forget that time Roger Ebert suggested you skip what was then the most recent Michael Bay film and instead go into the kitchen, cue up a male choir singing the music of hell, and get a kid to start banging pots and pans together. Then close your eyes and use your imagination. I miss the days we used to have real critics. Indeed, critics have made a tidy little side hustle out of dunking on Bay. But is the vitriol overdone? After all, there is enjoyment to be found in his work. He's a technical master who concocts undeniably hearty visual feasts. In fact, this is what informs the pro-Bay crowd, who argue that because Bay has an identifiable and consistent style, he should be considered an auteur. Auteur theory essentially developed because French film theorists wanted to elevate film to the heights of, say, literature by positing the director of a film as being the equivalent to the author of a book. And warning, if you bring up auteur theory at a party, you do risk being considered insufferable. Auteur theorists believe that the best works of cinema should necessarily show the personal stamp of the director via a signature style, as well as recurrent visual and narrative preoccupations. Popular auteurs include Hitchcock, Campion, and Del Toro. But as we'll explore, Bay doesn't quite fit in this club. Now, Bay might take issue with the very premise of this video. Of Hollywood, he said, "What we do is not brain surgery. We are entertainers, plain and simple, and we're responsible to bring that money back, to make a profit." He's also noted that these are just f***ing movies. They're supposed to be fun. Rather than defending the intellectual or artistic merit of his films, the way some of his fans might, Bay seems to express a willful detachment from any notions of ideology or meaning in his work. According to him, a Michael Bay film is just entertainment, just a product, and we should treat it as such. But it doesn't quite work like that. It's basically impossible to tell a cinematic story without ideology creeping in, whether or not that ideology is intentional. Film critics Jean-Luc Comolli and Jean Narboni once claimed that every film is political for this exact reason. Blockbuster films like Bay's have huge amounts of money and resources poured into their production, and the people pouring that money in typically have certain ideological expectations. More esoterically, Comolli and Narboni argued that the very nature of cinema itself meant that ideology is inescapable. To them, the medium of film is an artistic rendering of reality, complete with all the biases and beliefs of the creators. So, depending on things like where a movie was made and the background of the director, certain ideologies are sure to be represented in the movie in some way. This means that not only can we potentially glean a director's personal ideology via their work, but arguably more importantly, we can look at the output of broader groups of creators to define dominant ideologies. So it's worth asking, is there a dominant American ideology via Hollywood films? Hell to the Star-Spangled Yeah! The idea of a national cinema continues to be explored deeply in film studies, and kind of uses the same basis as auteur theory. By looking at blockbuster movies for common themes, sentiments, tropes, and archetypes, we can gain an idea of a broader American ideology. That means the values that are deemed positive or negative, and the aspirations encouraged by the culture at large. And Bay's work is arguably a pure, uncensored example of American national cinema. His movies do present an ideology, but one that Bay doesn't necessarily own. In making movies that appeal to the largest possible audience and disavowing meaning in the process, Bay leaves the door wide open for the dominant American ideology to waltz in, take its shoes off, pop open a can of Budweiser, and make itself right at home. This goes a long way in explaining Bay's work. Namely, his films are reflections of the most desirable aspects within American culture and the commodified state of them. Fittingly, Bay's style was developed in advertising, leading to a lingering habit of objectification. Plenty of directors get critiqued for objectifying women, but Bay doesn't stop there. He objectifies everything. If an expensive supercar is in the scene, his camera will glide along its angles, highlighting its form and presence. The same with military hardware like fighter jets and state-of-the-art guns. Bay's camera will focus on them purely as objects rather than the things they represent. And speaking of shiny objects, Bay's camera often focuses on various parts of conventionally attractive women's bodies before glancing to see if there's any hint of emotion on their faces. By way of box office-driven pragmatism, Bay's work is filled with symbols of the American ideal presented as unironically desirable. Of course, it's possible to reflect the ideals of American culture without straight up endorsing them, and plenty of directors are making that commentary, arguably minus the straight up objectification. The key is the relevance of the imagery or sound to the narrative being told. Critic Kristen Thompson explored this through the idea of cinematic excess. Here, excess means any stylistic elements that are included in a movie seemingly for their own sake, rather than to contribute to the movie's overarching message. These elements don't deepen the narrative, but their presence necessarily affects narrative meaning simply by way of being there. So when Bay includes, say, a scene where some rando 1%er shows off his car collection and leeches on a woman.
Look at the curves. Elegant, isn't it? Beautiful. Sensual. Built to evoke the body of the ideal woman.
Or when the camera blatantly lingers a little too long on a corporate logo, or when a big robot takes a fat piss on John Turturro, you get classic examples of cinematic excess. Thompson thought that this kind of excess comes from a director's personal taste or preoccupations, like J.J. Abrams with lens flare, or Tarantino with feet. But interestingly, most of the excess in Bay's work comes from the capitalist pragmatism that defines his approach to filmmaking. Because, again, Bay seems driven by the box office more than anything else. Bay's cinematic excess does clash with the apparent narrative ambition of his storytelling. Like when he shows American GIs whooping and hollering at their kills during the attack on Pearl Harbor. When he makes sure we see the, and we're quoting here, enemy scrotum of a Decepticon.
I am directly below enemy scrotum.
These classic Bay moments of excess are rooted in how the American ideal expects people to behave. All of Bay's leading men are templates for the ideals that American culture broadly tells men they need to aspire to. And all of Bay's leading women are, nope, wait, that's right, there aren't any. With the rare exception of Ambulance, where Isa Gonzalez actually gets to do some stuff, actresses in Bay films are pretty much just treated as eye candy, reinforcing American feminine ideals of, banging bods and silky hair. Other themes include distrust of government, lionization of military force, indulgent product placement, and gun fetishism. All of these textual hallmarks are direct mirrors of the dominant American ideology. They're present in a Bay movie regardless of their objective relevance to the narrative of the individual films. And Bay's narratives will, invariably, at some point or another, halt to highlight them. In this way, and through the lens of Thompson, Bay's movies are defined by a kind of compromised cinematic excess that is unmistakably American. Notably, this standard fare American excess is what we reckon precludes Bay from being considered an auteur. While he obviously has a signature style and aesthetic preoccupations, any messaging in his work lacks a sense of conviction. So Bay's films are ideologically and stylistically compromised. Surely that gives us a definitive answer. Well, not quite. Because there's still the issue of Bay's undeniable skill as a director. Even Roger Ebert, aforementioned Bay critic, recognized the director's technical chops and proficiency with special effects. This, more than anything else, is arguably what draws people to Bay's films. His visceral, kinetic style of action sucks us in through rapid-fire cutting, displacing us in time and space in a way that prioritizes how the scene makes us feel, rather than our comprehensive understanding of the exact events unfolding. As scholar Stephen Shaviro explains, this makes Bay a prime example of post-continuity cinema, which takes inspiration from other art forms like video games. It basically abandons classic editing conventions that typically help the audience understand the spatial temporality of the actions on screen. As Shaviro puts it, Bay is the new D.W. Griffin, or the anti-Griffin, as he mixes and matches shots with no concern for traditional articulations of spatial and temporal continuity. Bay's camera never stops, whirling around the carnage in ways that flout standard filmmaking conventions, and the elements within the frame are a flurry of movement too. The end result, Bayhem, is chaotic, impressionistic action that defies comprehension. In fact, this echoes the main issue people have with Bayhem, that it's just overwhelming cinematic noise. But opposed to the unconsidered ideology present in Bay's work, his action sequences are a genuine directorial expression, used to convey the reflexive, adrenaline-clouded state that true danger puts us in as human beings. Couple this with the bombastic visuals that comprise Bay's action sequences, and you get not only some of the most striking spectacles in all of blockbusterdom, but also something that hits on deeper philosophical questions of the things that captivate us visually. We can understand this with the help of Immanuel Kant, who thought there are two main types of things that give us visual pleasure: beauty and the sublime. Kant saw beauty as dealing with the contemplation of order and harmony, appreciated for its own sake rather than for its utility or value, like a string of symmetrical pearls, the gentle swirls of a conch shell, or fresh basket of tater tots. Beautiful things make us feel. Take the delicate textures and light in Sofia Coppola's The Virgin Suicides, or the set design of Grand Budapest Hotel. These are beautiful, and their beauty can be comprehended. The sublime, on the other hand, deals with the awe-inspiring and the dangerous, viewed from a place of safety. It's the things that we can't comprehend because our brains are just too damn limited. Or in other words, sublimity means the absence of order or comprehension. Sublime fine art, a favorite of the Romantic era, might depict an epic military battle, or a ship fighting its way through the angry sea. Through Kant's aesthetic lens, Bayhem is a prime example of the sublime. From giant explosions to highway-spanning car wrecks to New York City being decimated by meteors, the situations that Bay depicts in his action scenes represent levels of destruction that, if faced in real life, would be so extensive in their impact that we couldn't possibly reckon with it. And crucially, the way in which Bay presents these situations is geared towards non-comprehension, potentially leaving us with a gut feeling of excitement or dread that has no discernible point of origin within the film. It is, as we think the kids would say, though we could be wrong, a whole-ass vibe. And we aren't alone in thinking so. New York Times critic A.O. Scott had this to say about Bay's latest film, Ambulance. Bay's virtuosic flouting of the laws of physics, probability, and narrative coherence is meant to catapult you into a zone of sublimity where melodramatic emotion and adrenalized excitement fuse into a whole new kind of sensation. Big operatic feelings are both heightened and lightened by propulsive speed and overscaled action. Political theorist William E. Connolly explores the wider overall link between the sublime-tinged style of filmmaking and the ever-increasing speed of capitalism and consumerism in our modern lives. Film, to Connolly, is a useful tool for us to examine human methods of perception and conception, i.e., how we view and think about stuff that we see. In this, the techniques used by directors to evoke emotion, generate engagement, and affect the way we think of the narrative are analogous to the techniques of systems like capitalism and consumerism. Connolly states that, increasingly, contemporary film is geared more towards what he calls the infraconscious. This is the realm of reflex and impression that Bay's filmmaking does so well, and there's nothing inherently sinister about a sublime action film. But there is an issue here, namely that Bay's American excess and his sublime Bayhem aren't mutually exclusive. His movies don't stop evoking the American ideal just because there's a chaotic action sequence. Both are intertwined, and Bay seems to sense this intuitively. His action scenes often take little micro breaks to let the audience breathe, probably in attempts to alleviate tension or provide relief. Yet this is where the American excess reliably creeps back in. We still get sexy shots of supercars pulled right out of commercials, or weird cringy jokes.
If I stop covering you, it means I'm dead. But that ain't gonna happen.
Or macho men being almost comically doodly, often all at once. And for Connolly, this connection might be exactly in tune with what he's diagnosed about the overall direction of filmmaking. He argues that the hyperspeed of modern film is a direct reflection of the ever-growing ways in which capitalism and consumerism seek to overwhelm us as human beings. If you've ever been to Times Square, you'd probably catch our drift. The goal of a flashing neon sign or a billboard the size of a building is, like a Michael Bay film, to completely inundate our senses. But of course not quite so much that we get too overwhelmed to run into the M&M store and buy a lifetime supply of blue chocolates. Now, we're not saying that there's some conspiracy theory subliminal messaging going on here, or that Michael Bay is a deep state agent brainwashing us into supporting America. It's more of an unintended effect of his visual aesthetic. By splicing in these moments that positively reflect American excess, as he learned to do in advertising, right into sequences that favor gut reactions over heady contemplation, we're primed to view both in the same way. When our senses are overwhelmed, we stop trying to follow the action, and instead rely on the content's impressionistic qualities. Using Thompson's thesis, you could persuasively argue that the chaos of Bayhem primes us to ingest the dominant ideology of American capitalism at hand without the benefit of critical distance. So with everything we've explored about Bay's work, from the pragmatic, box office-driven ideology to the very American form of cinematic excess to the purposively incomprehensible editing style, what are we left with? Well, we think there's a way to recognize all of this and still enjoy Bay's films. What if we view Bay's work as a way for us to engage with the realities of how the systems we live within constantly prime us to stick to the status quo? Or how ideologies are malleable things that will seep into any gaps they can in forming our values and biases. In not resembling real life in any way, shape, or form, might the films of Michael Bay be able to teach us how to live a little more thoughtfully in our late capitalist hellscape? And in that way, Michael Bay might just qualify as unintentionally deep, or as it's officially known, oopsie daisy smart. But what do you guys think? Is analyzing Bay's films even worth it? Or should we listen to the man himself and just accept them as innocent, mindless entertainment? Sound off in the comments. Hit subscribe like it's a big red demolition button, and don't forget to ring that bell. As always, a big thanks to our patrons for all your support, and be sure to check out the new features available on our Patreon page. And as always, thanks for watching. Later.